Money will come when it has a purpose. So a lot of times we're waiting for the money to be in a bank account before we live out our purpose, before we go back to school, before we buy that wallet. It doesn't work that way. We have to make a decision first, and then the money will show up.
Okay, Choyo, I'm so excited to have you on this episode. I know you and I were just kicking it off with just a little quick conversation. I know we met a couple months back and talked a little bit about like, what would we actually even talk about on this episode? And you and I just talked about this whole concept of flow and money and all of it kind of flowing together. And so I'm excited to kind of dive into that and share that and go all in on that kind of conversation and how we can create and generate money and how we need to be interacting with money and money management, all of those types of really great things and how that really ties together. Before we get into all that juicy conversation, do you want to share a little bit about you?
Hi, and thank you so much for inviting me on. My name is Choyo Wilson Daniel. I am a money mindset mentor. So I help women to release the pain so you can make it rain. That's the law. So I believe once we're rich on the inside, we can be rich on the outside. So I spend all of my days helping women to transform their relationship with money.
Yeah, I think that's amazing because I know for a lot of women that are maybe getting started in business or have been in business for a while, you might have actually heard about how your relationship with money impacts the way your business is, but maybe this is something you're well versed in. Maybe this is something brand new. I know that the two of us are going to have a conversation that's going to benefit no matter where you are on that spectrum, because money is like time, right? Like it's everywhere. We engage with it every single day. We need it for actual functional living. There's like so much, we interact with it so much, but I don't know about you, but for me, it was a long time. I probably was like 30 years old before I realized that you actually have a relationship with money and that the way that relationship is determines how much that money shows up. It's more than just a budget, more than just looking at your bank accounts. Like there's so many other layers to it. So tell us a little bit, like, how did your journey with money get started? Like, why do you spend your days now helping other women make their money right?
Well, because I was in a struggle pattern for so long. And my wake up call was when my name was on the foreclosure list for my home. I was making six figures. I just didn't have a good relationship with money. So I have always known how to make money, but I did not know how to have money. Yeah. I was so afraid of money. I get so anxious talking about money. I used to avoid money conversation. The energy was just so off. So I had to learn how to be friends with money. Yeah. I had to learn and strengthen my belief that money wanted to provide for me. Money wants to protect me. Money wants to be in my life. So I had to create a whole new money paradigm belief and really cultivate a healthy relationship with money.
Yeah. Well, and I think that that's so valuable because I think that feeling of like, I just don't want to talk about it. I don't want to be around it. Like that's so cultural, I think, in a lot of ways. Like there's so much like stigma around talking about money. And I remember my son was actually at a friend's house and he is my Monopoly like guru. He loves to play Monopoly. He loves any game that is around money. He loves earning money. So he's like started his own little business and he's like, I told him about stocks and how if you invest in stocks, like sometimes you can make money when, like the stock goes up. And so then now he's all gung ho about like making money by putting it in stocks. Like he's my money go-to friend. Like he loves talking about money. And he was at a friend's house and the mom told me, she goes, yeah, Luca's over. And he's like, so how much did you pay for your house? I love that she responded with not like, we don't talk about money. You don't ask people questions like that. She turned around and she's like, well, how much do you think we paid for our house? Like just, and kind of had that frame because there is like, it very well could have gone the other way where she could have been like, you just don't ask people those questions. Like you don't talk about that, but she didn't shut him down. She let him kind of think about it. And so he put out a guess and she was like, yep, you're pretty right. Like, that's pretty much what we paid for our house. So and like those fundamentals, right? Like those conversations that we had as a child are shaping how we interact and how we show up with it today. So how okay, we could go so many different ways right now. I'm like, where do we want to go with this? I know before we were talking, you had mentioned about current and currency and money and that like alignment with flow. So do you want to like share a little bit, why is it so important for us to kind of transform this thought process around money into this element of that, bringing that element of flow?
Yes, because currency comes from the root of current, and current means flow. And so I think it's so important that we investigate and look at different areas in our lives where there's stagnation. And if there's not flow in those areas, I think we need to pause without judgment just to see what's going on and how to start the flow again.
Yes.
And for me, I use my cycle as the indication to evaluate the flow of money in my life, the flow of healthy relationships, the flow of my health. And I started calling it the GAP, GAP. And for me, that stands for God's area of preparation. So anytime my cycle comes on, I have to stop. And well, for me, I used to believe that when my cycle was on, that means I'm supposed to be crawled up in a bed, watching Netflix or reading a book. And so I just took on that perspective and that belief because that's what everybody around me was doing. But I realized that I wasn't where I needed to be in my business. So with the GAP, that was my time to evaluate and become this detective with my life. And I had to look to see if I was in pure alignment, if I was in harmony with my goals. And the reality is that I'm not, because if I was, then all this other stuff would have manifested. So I use that time to just reconnect with source and to get into pure alignment.
Yeah. And I love this idea that you talked about too in there, like that's this idea of the stagnant. And then you use the word flow, but I even recently have been in this place of like movement, right? Like how movement makes and like flow and movement could kind of be these words that kind of go together. But how I know a lot for me and people I work with is like creating content and creating things in their business sometimes feels like this forced element, right? Like they have to force it. And yet how sometimes that movement is the very thing that they need to get things flowing again. So for example, I was talking about recently, I did yoga. I was feeling so blocked and stuck in my creation and what I was trying to do. And my ideas were just like swirling and I couldn't figure out where I wanted to go. And I was doing yoga. And all of a sudden that movement allowed for all of these thoughts to flow. And I actually grabbed my notebook and I was like scratching down notes as I was doing yoga because it really allowed that flow. And I know for me, there's been a big correlation to that in terms of money as well, that oftentimes when I'm like in that stagnant and like holding on to money and feeling that scarcity sort of space, it completely shifts and changes when we get in that place of allowing money to move and creating that movement in our money. So how is that kind of like that correlation of that, the difference between having stagnancy, I don't know what the word would be, but like in our money, right? Like holding on to our money in that scarcity sort of space versus what is that transformation you see happening when people get into that more flow, get into a little bit more of that movement and that more abundance kind of mindset with their money?
Yes. So anytime I have fearful thoughts or I go into this save mode, like just unhealthy save mode, immediately I have to go spend money because it's the law of circulation. If I'm not releasing anything, nothing is going to come in. So I immediately shift to giving it away, because when I give away, I'm letting God, the universe, the world know that I'm no longer in fear, and I trust that it's coming back, that the flow is going to happen again. And I cut off the flow because I got in fear and I started saving and hoarding my money.
Yeah. Well, that's so funny because I mean, like when we're recording this is right around tax time. And I'm like sitting there staring at my tax bill the other day and I was like, shoot diddly, I don't have the money for that right now. And so that was kind of where my mind went. It was like immediately I'm like, okay, my mind does not have this money. I need to find some way to create this money. And at the same time, I noticed I like started to shrink and get into that space of, oh, like I need to save and scrimp and do everything I possibly can to like contract. And I was talking to a friend and I was like, I need to do something that feels abundant, feels great, feels wonderful. And I was at a mall and I was like, you know what? I think I'm going to buy myself a really nice nice wallet because I need a new wallet. And I was like, I've never bought a fancy wallet, like an expensive wallet. And I feel like I use it every single day. It would be that reminder to myself every single day that there is money flowing and that I have this abundance. And so I bought this wallet. I didn't do it actually there at the mall because I didn't find one, but I went home and I ordered one online. And every time I use that wallet now, it is that constant reminder of like money is flowing out. And then what happened is I started to notice all of the different places that I could kind of create money, collect money to be able to pay my taxes. So this element, like you said, of sometimes when we get in that place of like, oh my gosh, I don't have the money, and then we contract, it changes everything when we start to push out a little bit.
In the presence of contraction, we have to expand. We normally shrink, but that's our opportunity to just expand and keep expanding.
So, okay. So when we talk about this idea of like expanding and contracting and money and like lack mindset, abundance mindset, what are some of those biggest mistakes that you see the women that you work with making when it comes to money?
Making decisions based on their bank account. So it's really looking at current circumstances and they're making decisions based on what's currently in their bank account, which is going to keep them in the same spot month after month, year after year. Money will come when it has a purpose. So a lot of times we're waiting for the money to be in a bank account before we live out our purpose, before we go back to school, before we buy that wallet. It doesn't work that way. We have to make a decision first, and then the money will show up. And it may show up in the 11th hour. But if you look back over your life, every time you needed money, it showed up. It may not have showed up right when you wanted it, but right when you needed it to show up, it showed up. And that can only happen if you make a decision first. And a lot of times women just don't make the decision.
Yeah, I love that. And I even like caveat off there too, is like the expectation and the way that the money shows up, right? Like I know for me, even looking at this stuff with my taxes, was that I got a notification of a bump in a loan that I had taken a while back. And they said they were going to increase my loan amount if I wanted to. And I was like, that might actually pay for my taxes. And so like, even in that mindset of like, it's not actually money. It wasn't my business. It wasn't my paycheck. It wasn't like these other areas where you would hope that maybe money was coming from, but it was money coming from some way. Maybe I'm paying it off later down the road, but like in this moment is when I needed that money.
Right. And when you're not attached to the how or where it's going to come from anywhere, typically unexpected sources it would normally flow from.
Yeah. Okay. I love this. And so if I were to sit down with you right now and you were to say, hey, this is the next action step you kind of need to take in terms of like transforming your money, like what are those actions that you kind of see as being those pivotal things to get the ball rolling, like to get things moving?
The number one thing I think is every day track your money. So have a piece of paper on your desk, and not tracking it from an accounting standpoint, but tracking it from appreciation, because what you appreciate appreciates. And so when we're focused on all the areas of when money is coming in, guess what's going to happen? More money is going to come, because that's what we're focused on. So often we are focused on our lacks and limitations and what we don't have. So guess what? We keep creating lack and limitations. So if we focus on abundance, we're going to create more and more and more of abundance. So tracking, being so grateful for everything that comes in, if you start to track, you will realize more money is coming in than you even imagined.
Yeah, I noticed that. Like a lot of people, I think, track their money in terms of a budget, right? They're looking at like what's going out and do I have the money to go out? And I think far underappreciate the value of like celebrating those wins of money that's coming in, and how that makes such a huge difference in just being able to be like, yes, thank you. Oh, thank you. Somebody bought me coffee, or, oh, like those even, I think for me were a huge way to start celebrating the wins of where money was coming in, because somebody was buying me coffee. And if I transformed that into a monetary value of like, that person just gave me $5 coffee, like even those sorts of things really made a huge difference for me when I started to notice where money was abundant.
Yes.
Yeah. Awesome. So if we were to look at like another one of those big mistakes that you see women making, I know you said waiting for the money to show up in their bank account. I know it's huge. Making the decision that you're going to do it regardless and like just waiting for that money to kind of show up, right? Like, and moving forward in those actions and those aligned actions. Sometimes I think people get fearful of like, okay, well, how do I do that without being irresponsible with my money? Like, how do I actually take action and do this thing without the security or the knowing that the money is going to actually show up?
So we're not just spending recklessly. So we're not going out, buying a BMW or a Mercedes Benz if you don't have the money in your account. But if the action is going to move you closer to your goal, then I say go for it. Mm-hmm. And only that individual know what their goal is. So for an example, I can use myself for an example. When I first started getting a mentor and a coach, I didn't have the money for that. Mm-hmm. But immediately I signed up for it. And then within 2 weeks, the money showed up because the money had a purpose. Now, if I would have waited for my bank account to have that money in it, to this day, I still would not have a coach or a mentor. Mm-hmm. So if the action will move you closer to your goals, then go for it.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I remember when I joined in with my coach's program, I don't know, a few years ago, I remember sitting there feeling like I need to do this. I want to do this, but I'm just not sure I'm going to have the money to back it. And I don't know if the money's going to come. And I remember calling my dad and I was like, Dad, I swear by this. I need to be in this. I feel like this is 100% where I need to be. I think that it'll be enough. Like I'll be able to generate enough revenue to pay for it. But if I don't, do you have my back? Like, will you loan me the money if I have to? And he was like, sure, like whatever you need, and I never borrowed money from him. I like joined into the program, but just that little bit of security of if I join into this and I take this huge risk, right? Like at the time, I think the most I'd ever spent in my business was like maybe $2,000 on the coach. And this was like a $15,000 investment. And I was like, I don't know, like, what if I can't pay for this every single month, and just that act of moving forward with it, not knowing, am I going to have the money every single month to pay for this?
Yes. And then every single month you had the money, right?
Yes.
Yes.
Some way or another, there was always some way to pay for it.
Right.
Yeah. So this has been such a great conversation. And I think it's so valuable to kind of take a look at those beliefs and those thoughts and those ways in which you're interacting with money, because it does make such a huge difference. And I know it's literally like, this has been one of the main areas of focus for me over the last few years, is really just looking at those money blocks, the ways I interact with money. And I was doing a program that I did years ago, and it's a 30-day program, like having you do these little micro steps of money interaction every single day. And I did it, probably 3 years ago, and I just redid it. And to go through it the second time around and see the massive change that I've made, like things that maybe were really challenging for me back then, now are no longer their issue, right? Like even in the opposite end of not just spending, but receiving, right? And that was, I think for me, that was the bigger area that I needed to grow and work on, was being okay with receiving, right? When we're out to dinner and somebody offers to pay my dinner or whatever, I used to fight and argue it and be like, no, I'll pay for it. Now I'm like, thank you. Thanks for dinner. And how those little micro shifts that I've made have made such a huge difference in not just the giving, but the receiving. And so how have you seen that element of like, it's not just about spending, that's not just about giving, but that willingness to receive in that money interaction as well?
Yes. And then using the word spending, and I even shifted my language around that, because in my mind, I'm like, spending means it's not coming back. So when I spend money, quote unquote, I say I'm investing or I'm circulating, because spending in my mind just has this negative connotation, like I never see it again. So receiving is so huge, because a lot of the women that I work with, including myself, and I do this work Every day I labor with my money blocks. Every day I'm a student and I'm a teacher of this material. And it all boils down to worth issues and not feeling worthy to receive, not feeling worthy to ask for premium prices. So it's really hard for myself and my tribe to receive. So we go through the whole model of receiving ship. And we start with something as simple as receiving a compliment. Because that's different. And just getting comfortable with the whole process of circulating, receive, ask, receive. Yes.
Yeah. So valuable. Because it is true. Like somebody says, oh, you look beautiful today. And we're like, oh, no, it's just this, or oh, it's just that, versus just being like, thanks, I appreciate that, you know? And when I started doing that, it was amazing how people were like, what? Like, because it takes people aback, right? When you're just like, oh, thank you. I appreciate that. Oh yeah. You like my hair? I curled it this morning. It looks great. Right. Like, no, I mean, it's not quite like that, but that element of like, it totally shifts the tone and it's not common. We don't see it as much, but when you do, it starts to people turn their heads a little bit in a good way, not in a bad way. So I appreciate so much what you've shared here, because I know it's made such a huge difference for me over the last couple of years. And I know that more women need to like understand and interact and learn in their money story and that money interaction so much more. So where can people go connect with you and learn more about what you're doing and potentially be one of the women in your community and tribe and really make these massive shifts?
Yeah, so all social media, choyodaniel.com is my website. I had to think about that. I'm sorry.
Okay.
And on Facebook, Instagram, Love Shift Coaching. So all things social media.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Is there any one last thing that you feel like we've left out that you want to make sure to leave people with?
I just want to say to stop waiting. We all have everything we need right now within us to accomplish any goals or dreams that we have for our life. You have everything you need. Just get into action, imperfect action. Stop hiding, become more visible, and just stay in action. And if you are in action, you cannot fail.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you so much for coming on. It was a pleasure, and I hope you have a great day.
Thank you. I enjoyed being here.